Amara woke up every morning before the sun had even begun to rise, her small room silent except for the faint ticking of a worn-out clock on the wall. She would quietly get dressed in her plain uniform, careful not to make a sound that could disturb the wealthy household she worked for. Even though she had no family in the city, she carried herself with quiet strength, because this job was her only chance to survive and maybe, someday, build a better life. Her days were long and exhausting, filled with tasks that never seemed to end, from scrubbing floors that shined like mirrors to polishing silver that reflected her tired face. Amara did everything with precision, yet she was rarely appreciated. Her fellow staff whispered behind her back, making jokes about her dark skin and humble background, and even some guests treated her as if she were invisible. Sometimes they would glance at her with suspicion, as though her presence itself was a mistake. Amara had grown used to the judging eyes, but it did not make it hurt any less. Every comment, every sneer, reminded her that in the eyes of this world, she was considered less than everyone else. Still, she held her head high and worked harder, hoping that one day, someone would see beyond the surface and notice her worth. She believed in herself even when no one else did. Despite the constant judgment, Amara had small moments of joy that she clung to. She loved watching the first rays of sunlight hit the garden outside the mansion windows, the flowers swaying gently in the breeze. It reminded her that there was beauty in the world, even if it seemed far away from her own life. Sometimes she would hum softly while cleaning, creating little melodies that made her feel less lonely. Even within the mansion, there were reminders of inequality that weighed heavily on her. She was expected to work faster, to serve silently, and to always be polite, no matter how others treated her. Her meals were simple, and she ate alone in the kitchen while the family enjoyed lavish dinners upstairs. She could hear their laughter and imagine a world where she might also be free to live without fear of judgment. One day, while carrying a tray of tea to the living room, Amara overheard some staff members laughing cruelly about her. "She'll never fit in here, no matter how hard she tries," one of them whispered. Another added, "Look at her, always so quiet, so plain." The words stung, but Amara did not respond. She knew arguing would do no good, and pride held her tongue. She silently promised herself that one day, her actions would speak louder than their words. Amara's mind often wandered to memories of her childhood, a time when life had been simpler. She grew up in a small village where people judged her less harshly, and where laughter and warmth had been part of everyday life. Those memories fueled her determination to endure the present. She reminded herself that her worth was not defined by the judgments of others, and that her strength lay in surviving and continuing to hope. Even when she was exhausted, she never allowed herself to show weakness in front of the household. Every day required a performance of competence, patience, and humility. She had to anticipate the needs of the family and staff, always be ready to respond, and never let mistakes happen, because in this mansion, even a small error could turn into a reason for ridicule. The fear of being judged was constant, but Amara turned it into quiet resilience, using it to push herself to do better. Her struggle was not just physical, it was emotional. Every night after her long workday, she would sit on her small bed and think about her life, about why people treated her differently, and about the dreams she still dared to have. She wished for a friend, someone who could see her true self, someone who would not judge her for her skin or her position. But those dreams seemed distant, and she often feared they might never come true. Yet, even in the darkest moments, Amara did not give up. Her struggle became her strength, and her quiet endurance set her apart from everyone else. She knew that life would be unfair, that people would judge her for things beyond her control, but she also knew that patience, kindness, and resilience could change the course of her story, and deep inside, she held on to the hope that one day, someone would notice her, not for her position or her skin, but for her courage, her heart, and the quiet dignity that no one could take away from her. Life inside the mansion was a world apart from anything Amara had ever known. The walls were tall and polished, reflecting chandeliers that sparkled like captured stars, and the floors were so shiny that her reflection often stared back at her, reminding her of the invisible divide between her life and the opulence surrounding her. Every room had its own rules, its own expectations, and every person seemed to play a part in maintaining the perfect, polished illusion. From the moment Amara stepped into the mansion, she noticed the subtle tensions that ran through the staff. Everyone had a role, and any mistake could lead to whispers, rumors, and sometimes public humiliation. The cooks eyed her suspiciously whenever she entered the kitchen, while the housekeepers gave her curt nods that barely hid their judgment. Even the gardener, who usually smiled at everyone, seemed to regard her with cautious distance, as if he expected her to falter. The family she served lived in a world that was almost unreal to Amara. Every day, a stream of visitors arrived, each one dressed in elegance and speaking in tones that demanded attention. The billionaire father was a man of influence, rarely present, but his presence loomed in the form of wealth and power. His daughter, Isabella, walked through the rooms with confidence and charm, commanding the attention of everyone around her. Yet at the same time, she seemed almost untouchable, as if nothing in this world could faze her. Amara moved carefully among the family and guests, anticipating their needs before they even spoke. Her hands polished the silver tea set to a mirror finish, her eyes noted every detail of the room, from the smallest scratch on the floor to the faintest smudge on the windows, and yet, despite her flawless work, there was rarely a word of praise, only quiet acknowledgement, the kind that made her feel seen but not valued. The staff dynamics were even more complicated. Every day felt like walking on a tightrope, and Amara had learned to watch the smallest cues. A raised eyebrow or a lingering glance could mean criticism was coming. Some staff members seemed to take joy in her discomfort, whispering cruel jokes about her skin and background. Their laughter was always just out of earshot, but Amara felt it like a cold breeze, chilling her confidence. There were, however, moments when the mansion's quiet corners offered her a strange kind of comfort. She would slip into the garden during her brief breaks, marveling at the perfectly manicured flowers and the gentle trickle of the fountain. In these moments, she could almost forget the harsh judgments, feeling like she belonged to the world outside the mansion, if only for a little while. Amara also observed the family closely, especially Isabella, and began to notice small cracks in the perfect image they projected. The daughter laughed with her friends, but sometimes her eyes carried a flicker of doubt or empathy. She noticed the way Isabella occasionally lingered near Amara, not in judgment, but with quiet curiosity, as if she sensed there was more to this servant than anyone else had ever seen. Every interaction in the mansion was like a game, a careful dance of etiquette, expectation, and silent competition. Even simple tasks could become complicated. The way Amara carried a tray, the speed at which she polished the silverware, the way she answered a question, all were constantly being measured, judged, and whispered about, and yet, she never let the weight of it crush her. She walked with her head high, her heart quiet but determined. As the days passed, Amara started to understand the unspoken rules, the hidden hierarchies, and the power dynamics that ran through the mansion. She saw how small gestures could shift perception, how a word from the right person could protect her, and how a misstep could ruin everything. It was exhausting, but it taught her resilience, patience, and the importance of quietly observing before acting. Even amid the luxury and the constant judgment, Amara held on to her dreams. She imagined a world where kindness and courage mattered more than appearances, where her work and heart could earn her respect rather than scorn. And though the mansion felt like a cage at times, it also became her training ground, shaping her into someone who could survive in a world full of judgment yet still remain strong, compassionate, and true to herself. Isabella, the billionaire daughter, was everything the mansion demanded someone to be: graceful, confident, and seemingly untouchable. She moved through the halls like she owned every inch of the space, her laughter ringing like crystal, catching the attention of staff and guests alike. Yet beneath the surface of perfection, there was a sharp intelligence and a curiosity that set her apart from the rest. Something in her always searched for truths that others ignored, and something in her made her notice things no one else did. Amara first saw Isabella not as a friend, but as another figure of authority, someone whose approval, or disapproval, could define her day. The daughter's presence was commanding, even in silence, and Amara felt the weight of being watched. Every small movement was calculated, every word carefully spoken, and Amara often wondered if Isabella ever truly looked at her, or if she simply observed her as part of the background. One afternoon, as Amara carried a tray of freshly brewed tea, she accidentally brushed against Isabella's silk gown, a tiny mistake that could have earned her harsh words, but instead, Isabella's eyes softened for just a moment, noticing the nervous hesitation in Amara's posture, the quiet tension in her shoulders. Isabella didn't speak immediately. She only studied the young servant with an intensity that made Amara's heart skip. For the first time, she felt like someone was seeing more than the uniform and the skin and the endless tasks she performed. Over the next few days, Isabella continued to watch, and Amara began to notice subtle differences in her behavior. The daughter didn't mock her or join in the gossip. Unlike many others, she asked polite questions about Amara's work, sometimes lingering in the kitchen under the pretense of needing something, but really just observing. It was a small act, almost invisible, but to Amara, it felt like a spark in a dark room, a tiny recognition that she was not invisible after all. Isabella herself had a complicated world, one filled with expectations and scrutiny from every angle. She was the heiress to immense wealth, constantly judged for her choices, her friendships, even her thoughts. In a household where appearances mattered more than reality, Isabella had learned to wear a mask, to laugh when necessary, to charm when required, and to keep her genuine curiosity hidden beneath layers of elegance. Yet something about Amara's quiet dignity and steadfast presence intrigued her, something rare and genuine that didn't bend to judgment or pretense. One evening, as the mansion hosted a small gathering, Isabella observed Amara from across the room, serving drinks to guests with perfect composure, her movements precise, her posture steady, yet there was a hint of weariness in her eyes, a subtle frustration at the unfairness of the world. Isabella felt a pang of empathy, coupled with a strange determination. She didn't want to just feel sorry for Amara. She wanted to understand her, to see her rise above the whispers, the sneers, and the constant judgment. It was in that moment that Isabella realized something powerful. She had the influence to make a difference, to shift perceptions in ways Amara could never achieve alone. The idea ignited within her, a quiet, steady fire that demanded action, but she also knew that any public support for a servant could shock the household and society. It could even backfire. Her mind raced with possibilities, strategies, and risks, yet she felt certain that this was worth it, worth breaking the unspoken rules of hierarchy and judgment. As days passed, Isabella found herself intentionally creating small moments of connection, a kind word when no one was listening, a thoughtful gesture in passing, a subtle encouragement that only Amara could feel. Slowly, a silent understanding grew between them, a recognition that transcended roles, wealth, and social expectations. Isabella began to see Amara not as a servant, but as a person of courage, intelligence, and dignity, someone who deserved more than whispered judgment and scorn. And for Amara, these small moments carried weight beyond words. They were signs of hope in a world that had taught her to expect judgment at every turn. They were reminders that even in a place where appearances ruled, there were allies waiting, perhaps in the most unexpected forms. Isabella's interest and subtle support gave her strength, a quiet assurance that someone saw her, truly saw her, and that perhaps, just perhaps, the unthinkable, change, recognition, justice, was possible. It was a rainy afternoon when everything changed. The mansion was alive with activity, the staff scurrying about to prepare for an unexpected visit from an important business partner of the family. Amara was in the middle of cleaning the grand hallway, carrying a tray of crystal glasses filled with fresh lemonade. Her hands were steady, her steps careful, as if each movement could prevent disaster. Yet fate had a way of testing even the most careful. As she walked through the polished floors, a sudden gust of wind from the open terrace doors sent one of the glasses teetering on the edge of the tray. Amara's heart raced. She stretched her arm instinctively to catch it, but the glass slipped and fell to the floor, shattering with a sound that echoed through the hall. For a moment, there was silence, then a sharp gasp from the visiting guest, and finally, the whispering began. The staff were quick to point fingers, their eyes darting between each other, desperate to avoid blame. "How careless," one maid hissed under her breath. "She's always like this," another muttered, barely hiding her smirk. Amara's stomach sank. Though she had done everything she could, she had tried to prevent the accident, but in the world of the mansion, accidents were often seen as failures, not misfortune. The visiting businessman, a tall man with an intimidating presence, frowned as he surveyed the scene. "Who is responsible for this?" he demanded. His voice carried authority, and even the most confident staff members flinched. Amara stood frozen, her hands slightly trembling, ready to accept the blame, knowing that in a place like this, admitting fault could be both expected and unavoidable. Before she could speak, Isabella appeared, walking briskly toward the scene. Her eyes were sharp, scanning every detail, and in that instant, she saw what really happened, not the fault of Amara, but a small, unnoticed draft from the terrace doors that had caused the glass to fall. She raised her hand, signaling for calm, and stepped closer to the young servant, her presence alone commanding attention. "Wait," Isabella said firmly, her voice clear and confident. This was not her fault. Her words cut through the whispers like a knife, drawing all eyes toward her. The staff shifted uncomfortably, some embarrassed, some defiant, unwilling to admit they had judged Amara unfairly. The visiting guest looked confused, then impressed by Isabella's decisiveness. She continued, "The wind caused the glass to fall. Amara was only doing her job." There was a moment of stunned silence. Amara felt a mix of relief and disbelief. No one had ever defended her so openly, not the family, not the staff, never before. Isabella's boldness shifted the atmosphere in the room. The whispers died down, replaced by attention as everyone realized that the billionaire daughter had chosen to stand for what was right, rather than what was convenient. The staff exchanged glances, some unwilling to meet Amara's eyes, others secretly impressed. Yet the judgment that had been so harsh before lingered like a shadow. They had been forced to acknowledge the truth, but their pride made it difficult to admit it openly. Meanwhile, Isabella guided Amara to a quiet corner, away from the eyes of the mansion, her voice lowered, kind but firm. "You don't deserve this treatment, Amara. Don't let them make you feel smaller than you are." For Amara, the words were like a balm to a long open wound. The support of someone so powerful and respected in the household was more than she had ever imagined. It was proof that courage and empathy could change the narrative, that injustice could be challenged, even in a place designed to enforce hierarchy and judgment. But even as relief filled her, Amara knew this event was only the beginning. The mansion's social rules had been shaken, and some staff would not forgive or forget Isabella's act. There would be challenges ahead, whispers behind doors, subtle resentments, and perhaps even sabotage. Yet for the first time, Amara felt a spark of hope, a sense that she was no longer completely alone, and that someone had the courage to face the unthinkable alongside her. And so, the shattered glass became more than an accident. It became the spark that ignited change, the moment when justice and courage collided with judgment and prejudice. The mansion would never feel the same, and neither would Amara, who now began to understand that sometimes, the unthinkable, someone standing up for you, could transform everything in an instant. After the incident with the shattered glass, the mansion was never quite the same. A quiet tension settled over the staff, like a storm lingering on the horizon. Some whispered in hushed tones about Isabella's unexpected defense of Amara, others avoided her gaze altogether, unwilling to confront the truth that they had been wrong. Even small tasks became loaded with meaning, and every glance, every word, seemed charged with a new awareness. Amara, meanwhile, tried to focus on her work, but she could feel the eyes of the staff following her, judging her in new ways. Some were quietly resentful, convinced that she had been elevated above her place, while others seemed secretly supportive, nodding slightly when no one else was watching. She learned quickly that alliances in the mansion were fragile, shifting like shadows, and every step forward was met with resistance from those who feared change. Isabella, aware of the growing tension, observed quietly from a distance, her eyes scanning the hallways, noting every whispered conversation, every suspicious glance, and every small act of sabotage that could threaten Amara. She understood that defending someone once was not enough, that the real challenge was the subtle war of perception, the quiet power struggles that had governed the mansion for years. Amara found herself under more scrutiny than ever before. Every mistake, no matter how minor, was magnified, and the staff seemed determined to test her resolve. One day, while preparing the dining room for a formal dinner, a maid deliberately spilled a tray of utensils near Amara, causing a loud clatter. The sound echoed through the hall, and for a moment, everyone froze, looking to see who would take the blame. Before Amara could react, Isabella appeared once again, calm and composed. Her presence alone seemed to hold the chaos at bay. She approached the scene, and her sharp eyes quickly assessed what had happened. "Amara did nothing wrong," she said firmly. Her voice carried authority that silenced the murmurs. Her intervention prevented the situation from escalating, but it also made the resentment of some staff more evident, simmering beneath polite smiles. Despite Isabella's support, Amara began to feel the weight of being the center of attention. She had always preferred quiet endurance, but now, every step she took seemed loaded with expectation. With every act of kindness from Isabella came whispers of jealousy. With every small achievement came scrutiny. It was as though the mansion had decided that if she could rise even slightly, others must feel diminished. At the same time, the bond between Amara and Isabella deepened. Though still unspoken, Isabella continued to offer subtle encouragements, a smile, a nod, a quiet word of reassurance. But she also pushed Amara to be confident, to stand tall even when others tried to undermine her. It was a delicate balance, guiding her without drawing unnecessary attention, empowering her without angering those who clung to old hierarchies. One evening, while the mansion was quiet and most staff had retired for the night, Amara sat by the large window overlooking the garden, her mind racing with the day's events. She realized that her life had changed forever, not because she had done anything extraordinary, but because someone had chosen to see her worth, someone had risked their reputation to protect her, and that act had set off a chain reaction that could not be undone. But the rising tension was far from over. Amara knew that with support came responsibility, that every move she made was now under a microscope, that every action could be twisted into a story to suit the gossip of the mansion, and she also knew that some people would not forgive Isabella for interfering, that alliances could turn into open hostility, and that the quiet endurance she had relied upon might no longer be enough to survive. Yet, amid the anxiety and the judgment, a spark of determination ignited within Amara. She had survived this long through resilience, patience, and quiet strength. She had endured the whispers, the stares, the subtle cruelty of those around her, and now, with Isabella at her side, she felt a sense of possibility, a belief that change was not just possible, but inevitable if she could hold on to her courage. The mansion had become a battlefield of subtle power and judgment, but Amara had discovered a new weapon, hope, and as the days passed, both women knew that the real challenge was just beginning. The whispers, the resentment, the unspoken rules, they were not gone, they had only grown louder in the silence, waiting for the right moment to strike, and yet, for the first time, Amara felt ready to face them, because she was no longer alone. The day of the grand gala arrived, and the mansion was transformed into a glittering stage of elegance. Crystal chandeliers reflected hundreds of candles, the floors shone like glass, and the air smelled of roses and expensive perfume. Guests arrived in carriages and limousines, dressed in gowns and suits that spoke of wealth and power. Laughter and chatter echoed through the halls, but beneath the glamour, a storm was quietly brewing. Amara moved through the rooms like a shadow, unnoticed by most but observed closely by some. Her hands carried trays of hors d'oeuvres, her posture perfect, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and fear. She knew that tonight, everything could change. The whispers of staff and judgmental glances of guests weighed heavily on her, and yet, Isabella's quiet confidence had given her a courage she had never felt before. Isabella, dressed in a stunning emerald gown that matched her eyes, glided through the crowd with an air of authority that silenced even the most boisterous voices. She had spent the last few weeks observing, planning, and waiting for the right moment. Tonight, she decided, she would do the unthinkable. She would challenge the mansion's unspoken rules and confront the judgments that had weighed Amara down for so long. It started subtly, with a toast. The guests gathered around, glasses raised, and Isabella stepped forward, her voice clear and commanding. Tonight is not just a celebration of wealth or influence, she began, her eyes scanning the room until they landed on Amara. It is also a celebration of courage, integrity, and the strength it takes to endure judgment and injustice. A hush fell over the crowd, confusion mixed with curiosity as they turned their attention to the billionaire daughter. Then, without hesitation, Isabella told the story. Some of you may not know, but one among us has faced ridicule and scorn, not because of anything she has done, but because of who she is and the color of her skin. Amara has worked tirelessly, with dignity and grace, despite being judged by everyone around her. The room stiffened, whispers started, and some guests shifted uncomfortably, realizing they had been blind to the quiet strength of someone they had ignored. Isabella continued, her voice unwavering, "Tonight, I choose to stand up for what is right, to recognize her worth, and to demand that we see people for their character, not for superficial differences. Amara, will you please join me?" For the first time, all eyes were on Amara, whose hands trembled slightly as she stepped forward, stunned, yet filled with a sense of disbelief and hope. The crowd waited, and Isabella's words cut through the pretenses of wealth and hierarchy. "This is unthinkable in many eyes," she said, smiling, "but it is necessary. We must challenge the prejudices we carry and honor those who have shown true courage without ever asking for recognition." As she spoke, some guests shifted uncomfortably, unable to accept the breaking of old social rules, while others watched silently, moved by the bravery of the act. Amara's eyes filled with tears. She had never imagined someone with Isabella's influence would publicly defend her. She felt seen, truly seen, for the first time in her life. Her years of quiet endurance, her struggles and perseverance, had finally been recognized in a way that could not be ignored. Isabella extended her hand, and Amara took it, the gesture symbolizing not just support, but a shift in the balance of power. Even the staff, who had whispered and judged her for years, fell silent, their expressions a mixture of shame, surprise, and admiration. The unthinkable act had exposed them, showing that courage and integrity mattered more than rank or gossip. Isabella's boldness had changed the mansion's atmosphere in an instant, and Amara's life would never be the same. By the end of the evening, the gala had turned into more than a celebration of wealth. It had become a celebration of justice, empathy, and courage. Guests left talking about the extraordinary act, some in shock, some inspired, and Amara finally understood the power of having an ally willing to confront the impossible. The unthinkable had been done, and the ripple effect would last far beyond that night. For Amara, the act was more than recognition, it was liberation, proof that even in a world full of judgment, someone could stand up, challenge injustice, and change lives forever. And for Isabella, it was a reminder that true influence was not about wealth or appearances, but about using power to lift others. The mansion felt different the morning after the gala. A quiet energy hummed through the halls, subtle but unmistakable. The staff moved more carefully, their whispers softer, their glances less judgmental. Even the visitors who had stayed overnight remarked on a change in the atmosphere, though none could quite put it into words. Something had shifted, and everyone, even unknowingly, felt its weight. Amara walked through the mansion that morning with a mix of wonder and disbelief. The act of courage by Isabella had not only cleared her name but also altered the perception of everyone around her. People who had once sneered now regarded her with respect, some with hesitation, some with genuine admiration. She realized that the smallest acts, polite nods, whispered encouragements, had the power to rebuild a reputation that had been crushed under years of judgment. Isabella, as always, moved through the mansion with confidence, but there was a softness to her today, a quiet satisfaction in knowing that her actions had made a real difference. She found Amara in the garden, where the sunlight danced across the flowers, and spoke softly. "You've shown strength beyond measure," she said, "the way you've endured and remained yourself, it's remarkable, and it deserves to be recognized." Amara felt a surge of emotion she could hardly contain. Tears pricked her eyes, but this time, they were tears of relief, gratitude, and something new, hope. For the first time, she felt that her life could change in ways she had never imagined, not because of luck or chance, but because someone had dared to challenge the unfair world around her, and in doing so, had created an opportunity for her to step into her true self. The staff, too, began to adjust, some quietly acknowledging their past mistakes, offering small gestures of reconciliation. Others remained distant, still wary of the shift. But the mansion could no longer operate as it had before. The old hierarchies, built on judgment and gossip, had been shaken. The rules of power had changed, even if subtly, and everyone had to navigate this new reality. In the days that followed, Amara found herself entrusted with responsibilities she had never held before. The family began to rely on her not just for her work, but for her judgment, her insight, and her calm presence. What had once been a life of invisibility was now filled with recognition, trust, and quiet respect, and she approached these changes with the same grace she had always shown, her humility and diligence remaining intact even as others finally noticed her worth. Isabella watched quietly from a distance, proud of the transformation, but also cautious. She knew that change, while powerful, required nurturing. She made it a point to continue offering guidance, encouragement, and subtle protection, understanding that true change was not about a single act, but about consistency and care, about helping someone grow into the recognition and power they deserved. Amara herself began to see the world differently, not just the mansion, but life outside as well. The act of courage had opened her eyes to the possibility that injustice could be challenged, that kindness and integrity could triumph over prejudice and fear, and she carried this lesson with her in every movement, every choice, every interaction. knowing that her life would never be defined by judgment again. By the end of the week, the mansion had settled into its new rhythm, yet it was a rhythm transformed by courage, honesty, and empathy. The once harsh whispers were replaced by cautious respect, the once rigid social lines had softened, and a sense of possibility lingered in the air. For Amara, life had changed not because she had sought it, but because someone had dared to stand up for what was right, and in doing so, had given her a chance to rise. And as Amara looked across the garden that evening, watching the sunlight fade into warm amber, she knew one thing with certainty: the unthinkable had happened, but its effects were real, lasting, and life-changing. It was a reminder that courage, once shown, could create ripples far beyond the moment, altering not just individual lives, but the entire world around them. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow across the mansion's gardens, Amara sat quietly on a bench, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She reflected on the journey that had brought her here, from the whispered judgments of staff, the sneers of visitors, and the heavy weight of society's expectations, to the moment when the billionaire daughter had stood up for her and changed everything. That single act of courage had shifted the course of her life, and now, in the quiet of the evening, she could truly appreciate its impact. Amara thought about the early mornings filled with exhaustion and silent endurance, the years of labor where no one noticed her beyond the uniform and the tasks she performed. She remembered the stares, the whispers, the subtle cruelty that had made her question her worth, and yet, through it all, she had survived. She had learned resilience, patience, and the quiet strength of dignity, qualities that no one could take away, even when the world tried to define her by what they saw on the surface. Isabella joined her in the garden, her presence calm and steady. The two women shared a moment of quiet understanding, no words needed to convey what had passed between them. Isabella had risked her reputation, challenged the unspoken rules, and brought justice to a world that often ignored it, yet she had done so with grace, not arrogance, and in doing so, she had not only changed Amara's life but had also altered the environment of the mansion itself, teaching everyone that true courage often required defying expectations. Amara smiled softly as she thought about the lessons she had learned. One of the most important was that bravery came in many forms. It wasn't always loud or visible. Sometimes it was a quiet act of perseverance, a refusal to be diminished, a willingness to remain kind and true despite the harshness of judgment, and sometimes, it took the support of someone who saw your worth, someone brave enough to stand beside you when the world was unkind. The mansion, once a place of rigid hierarchies and constant scrutiny, had begun to change. Its halls were no longer ruled solely by whispers of judgment, its staff moved with a new awareness, and its guests were confronted, in small but meaningful ways, with the power of integrity and empathy. Even the smallest gestures, acknowledgments of effort, moments of kindness, subtle respect, had grown in significance, showing that real change often started quietly, then rippled outward to affect everything around it. Amara also reflected on the nature of human judgment, how easily people assumed they knew someone's worth based on appearances or social position. She realized that prejudice was not only damaging to those it targeted, but also to those who carried it, creating tension, envy, and distance in a world where connection could otherwise flourish. By standing up for someone else, Isabella had not only lifted Amara but had also challenged the hearts of those who had judged, opening a path for them to reconsider their actions and attitudes. In that moment, Amara understood that her journey was not just about surviving judgment or gaining respect. It was about the power of courage, kindness, and empathy to transform lives, about the importance of recognizing the humanity in others. Even when society insisted on ignoring it, she realized that change, even the smallest, often unthinkable kind, could ripple through the world in ways one could never predict, touching lives, shifting perspectives, and inspiring hope. As night fell, the mansion shimmered under the soft light of lanterns, and Amara felt a deep sense of peace. The struggles, the whispers, and the trials had shaped her, but they no longer defined her. She had emerged stronger, wiser, and more compassionate, ready to face the future with dignity and courage, and she knew that Isabella's act of bravery had reminded her, and everyone who witnessed it, that one person's courage could create lasting change. And in that quiet moment, Amara made a promise to herself, to carry forward the lessons of the unthinkable act, to stand up for those who could not, to act with kindness in a world that often demanded judgment, and to never forget the power of being seen, truly seen, by someone willing to do what others would not. The mansion, the people, and even society itself had been touched by that courage, and the echoes of it would continue to shape lives for years to come.